The experience of time is shaped by occupations. How we choose to spend our time ultimately defines who we are. Early in the history of occupational therapy, Adolf Meyer recognized the importance of time in human adaptation to disability and recognized that this was a legitimate concern for occupational therapy to address. He suggested that a full meaning of time and the evaluation of opportunity and performance as the greatest measure of time should be a central part of the occupational therapy philosophy. He advocated not only that purposeful use of time had the potential to be both health maintaining and health regenerating, but also that the way in which individuals with a disability use and organize their time in daily life was a measure of their ability to adapt. Another noted theorist in occupational therapy is Kilhoffner, and he outlined several propositions supporting the notion that temporal functioning was a useful conceptual base from which human adaptation and dysfunction could be better understood. So when we look at the temporal context as part of the framework, these are the factors that we're going to address in this lecture. Stages of life, duration of the activity, time of day, time of year, rhythm of activity. We all know that people participate in different activities at different stages of life. I think that you're getting a good understanding of that in your Opal class. When we look at how we select activities, it really depends on the time factor, the time of day. We're going to perform our morning routine. Maybe we take a shower in the morning, or maybe we take a shower in the evening. Maybe we only take a shower once a week or every other day. The time of year that we perform an activity, and some things are going to be dependent on the season, such as going skiing or swimming. For some clients, performing activities in their natural context allows them to be more successful. And so we use habits and routines, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too, because people who have difficulty with cognition, typically, the children that I've seen with developmental delays, they don't seem to understand if you're not performing the activity within the natural context of when it should be done. Why should we eat if we're not hungry? Why should we dress if it's not time to change your clothes in the morning or getting ready for bed, type of thing? And the same thing happens, I think, with elderly people, if they lose cognitive ability, the mind is able to maybe perform some tasks if they're done within the natural context and the time frame with which it was originally worked on. Children learn to negotiate the physical world, to orchestrate their own occupational patterns and interact with others within their family and outside their family through the use of play and school activities. And these are the activities that fill a child's time. During adolescence, as they're transitioning into adulthood, they're use their time creating and testing new identities, figuring out their roles and responsibilities. They begin to make the choices on how they are going to independently utilize their time. In young adulthood, the activities that take up an individual's time usually consist of maybe higher education, and then finding employment, possibly finding a significant other, leaving the nuclear family and moving out on their own, beginning to have their own family. In middle years, sometimes time is associated with work, might be in maybe relocating a job that they've had for a while. Sometimes geographical changes may occur. They may move away from the extended family. Sometimes natural things like may occur. There's a high divorce rate in our country. There's remarriage and blended families. And so during that middle years, if an individual chooses to have a family, it's taken up with, I would say, family and career. As the individual gets older, they begin to plan their time differently, moving away from work and exploring more volunteer or retirement leisure type activities, and looking maybe more at financial planning, maybe emotional and psychological needs as a result of change in how they utilize their time. And then as the individual gets older, biologically, their bodies begin to have changes in the health, and that becomes a focus of time use for the elderly. Very small capture, but you kind of get the idea of how stages of life and time are related. Within TOA, I've tried to differentiate and the text that we have differentiates the difference between an activity and an occupation. And if you remember, we talked about an occupation is an occurrence and it's an event in time. Pierce describes it as a particular person's experience unique to that moment, place, and makeup of social circumstances. She goes on to say that occupations are not repeatable, as every time you perform the occupation, it is slightly different. So the occupational experience has a beginning, a sequence of actions, an end, and a time of day, a pace, and a length of time that it's performed. On the other hand, when you're talking about activity, an activity she describes as the idea that conveys the general steps and description of the action that takes place. And it's important to differentiate between an activity and an occupation because it becomes significant when you're designing a client-centered occupational experience. So I think this graphic represents an activity of washing one's hands. And there is a sequence of steps that would be the most effective way in washing one's hands. So you turn on the water, you get the soap, you wash your hands, you dry your hands, you turn it off, and you throw it away. Okay? But think about when you wash your hands this morning, you washed them at home. What type of faucet do you have to turn on? Is that different than when you wash your hands here at school? Do you have two levers? Do you have one to get the temperature, the right temperature? What kind of soap do you have? Do you have the squirt soap? Is the bottle almost empty? Is it full? Is it easy to push? Is it clogged up? Do you use bar soap? Is the soap missing and there wasn't any soap and you had to go find the soap and replace it? Then you rinsed your hand. Was the water dribbling out just a little bit, or was it really gushing out and it splashed all over the place and then you had to wipe off the counter? So you get the idea is that each time you wash your hands, the experience is slightly different, but that's unique to the individual. Then that's what makes it an occupation, as opposed to an activity is just the sequence of steps. A discussion about time use really can't take place without also talking about an individual's values, interests, and goals. Because, as we've already said, time is highly associated with the occupations that people choose to do. So we need to look at an individual's values, what they choose to do, the choice of activity, how much time they're going to allow for that particular activities and priorities. And I'm not sure if you've done the COPM yet, but you will be doing that. It's an assessment tool, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. One of the ways that it's an interview with the client, and you have them list the activities that they want to be able to do. And then you have them select prioritize them of what's the most important, because then you know how much effort and time you want to allocate to working on that activity. I think it's also important for client-centered to find out what the person's interested in, because if they're not interested, they're not going to maintain their attention, and they're probably not going to follow through with the activity or the occupation at home if it's not important to them. And I think for us, in OT, we need to measure through goals, but I think it's also important for clients to have something to work towards. Part of this is because that when we're looking at time, it's important to figure out how an individual, what their interest is, because for some people, how they perceive time is going to be different. You might think something is extremely interesting, like this lecture, and then somebody else might think this lecture is extremely boring, and so the passage of time is going to take forever and ever. Having a conversation with somebody maybe, and you've got a whole lot of things to do, you want them to speed them up and get to the point of the conversation. Other conversations, you maybe will linger because you're having a good time with the give and take of conversation. So it really is about perception of how time passes. And recognizing, as an OT, you want to be able to recognize when someone gets frustrated or they're helpless, and maybe consider that time might be one of the issues that's making them feel the way that they do. Okay, tempo is the pace of life, or time pressure. Tempo is intimately connected to our biological rhythms. It's been described as the characteristic patterns of reoccurring behavior. It represents a flow of energy in time and in relation to the environment. It is assumed that when rhythms are in synchrony and energy flows more effortlessly and feelings are enhanced, that this is described as flow. We've already previously talked about that. So tempo concerns not only the biological makeup of every individual, but it also reflects how our values are translated occupational. And therefore, as I already described, and should be a consideration for occupational therapy practice. There are several biological systems that influenced by internal timekeepers. These have to do with our blood pressure, our body temperature, and our rest activity cycle. These internal clocks are dependent on external influences, such as social and physical environmental factors. The physical factors might be things like the light and day, whether it's light in the room or dark in the room, the ambient temperature, and social influences include things like when you have your meals, when you perform your daily care activities, when you do leisure activities, more likely to do those on a weekend than you would during the work week. And also it includes regular habits and routines performed at consistent times. Dogs or animals also have certain routines that are biological rhythms that impact them. If you have an animal, they usually are very insistent with the time of day that they're fed, or if you go for a walk. I have a dog that about 4:30 every afternoon he starts sitting on the couch because I might come home. Now I might not get there till 6:30, but he doesn't move away from that couch usually until I have entered the door. So these timekeepers influence the rest activity cycle of our body, and this is what makes us alert at times and energized and active, and then at other times we're drowsy and less energized. The biological rhythms provide optimal times for human function and can significantly influence the value of medical or therapeutic interventions. So you want to pay close attention to that they're not necessarily a morning person. You might be much more productive at scheduling your sessions later in the day, if possible. Older people many times wake up really early and then they go to bed really early. So scheduling your therapy times might be first thing in the morning. So we said biorhythms are the characteristic patterns of recurring behavior. Your circadian rhythms are associated with the sleep-wake cycle. Patterns such as your annual rhythms have to do with the seasons and the times of day. I think if you in October we're going to have another daylight savings time will go off, and sometimes that can significantly, just that 1 hour change in time can significantly impact individuals. It certainly does as you get older. I'm not sure if you guys it impacts you. There are also biological rhythms that have to do with they're called, I think it's pronounced ultradian, how fast your heart rates and your respiratory rates at resting. That is unique to you and what your pattern is. If you watch your own breathing to that of someone next to you, it may be different, and it's certainly going to be different for different activities. And it should change as the activity is more intense. Your heart rate and your respiration rate is going to change. So there are different patterns of your activity that are associated with all these other rhythms, like your sleep-wake timing, your skin temperature, your activity patterns when you perform different things, and they are going to be very responsive to the environment. I want to talk a little bit more about rhythms. The circadian rhythm, or the sleep-wake cycle, is probably the most obvious rhythm. Talked already a little bit about the importance of sleep and getting adequate sleep, and it's very closely associated with an individual's health. So that's an important topic to discuss with your clients if that's a factor. But we also might want to think about other types of rhythms that impact individuals, such as across an individual's day, the time of a month, especially for, well, obviously for a woman, the menstrual cycle. But there are also yearly cycles that impact activities that go on. Even our food selection habits are attuned to seasonal climate changes. It doesn't sound real appealing, or at least it doesn't to me, to eat a hot bowl of soup on the 4th of July. I'm more likely want to eat foods that are lighter, like a salad or corn on the cob, something that's seasonal in terms of when the growing season, fresh fruits and vegetables, that type of thing. But also because it's hot out, I don't really want to eat. My body temperature is warmer with the 100-degree weather and 98% humidity, that eating something warm is not very appealing. Other types of or social factors that impact time for you all, the semester times and when you're on breaks might impact the types of activities that you select to do. You're not probably performing a whole lot of leisure activities right now, but even within the day you may choose or select leisure and play activities more on the weekend versus during the week, the work week, and it makes it so you get in a kind of a rhythm of when you perform and for how long you're able to perform different activities. The circannual has to do with your body temperature regulation and seasonal variation in activity levels. We tend to be more sedentary in the wintertime than we are, well, we might maybe even sedentary in the extreme heat, but when it's more pleasant weather out, we tend to be more active in being outdoors. I don't know that those temperature changes are nearly as dramatic in the South because we have they're not, the fluctuations in temperature are not as great as they are up. That certainly is a factor. If there's a lot of heavy snow outside, people don't want to get outside. There are also rhythms necessary to maintain life demonstrated by individuals in their local, social, and cultural context. Think about the activities within your own life and how social activities, maybe not so much now that you're in graduate school, but when you were an undergraduate, it's now football season. You may or may not have been involved with that activity, but can you imagine at many universities, the football season there's certain cultural and social expectations that may influence an individual or how they spend time. In order to survive, it's necessary to pay attention to the multitude of internal clocks to maintain a proper synchrony. And when your sleep-wake cycle or your temperature control, your heart rate, eating, all of those basic survival type activities that we perform, if they're constantly out of whack, it leads to illness. And eventually, if it's significant enough, it could even possibly lead to death. A little assessment of that was in the Pierce book that I thought was kind of interesting. And just take a moment and think about your own assessment of time urgency. So that this will kind of give you a view of yourself in terms of how you value time. Do you look at your watch? Are there different times that during an activity that you might look at your watch? You might be looking at your watch quite a bit during this lecture because it seems to be going on and on. How fast do you talk? Are you the first or last person to finish eating? Do you walk fast or slower than most people? How about your driving? Do you constantly make lists to keep yourself on track? Do you get annoyed when you have to wait? And do you have a lot of a nervous energy? Not saying one's right or wrong, just wanting you to maybe reflect a little bit on your own sense of time. And now we're going to look at another aspect of the temporal dimension, which is temporality. And temporality is a subjective perception of time. It concerns the temporal character of occupation that's embedded in the meaning in relationship to one's sense of the past, the present, and the future. Whereas all animals experience tempo, only humans perceive temporality. Rituals are part of temporality, and they link the past, the present, and the future. Think about a ritual that you perform. It may be spiritual, it may be cultural, And for example, Christmas might celebrate Christmas. And when you think about Christmas, a lot of times there's a lot of sentiments. There's a lot of decorations that are frequently associated. And you think about the past Christmases you have. There may be people in your life that are not in your life anymore. And think about this Christmas, and you might think, if you're beginning to find a significant other, the relationship you have with that person, most likely your Christmases in the future are going to be different than you've experienced within your family, because now you're going to have to blend the habits and routines and rituals that you perform in your own family's Christmas experiences to that of the future. People and groups differ in real and meaningful ways with respect to their time perspectives, and because of this, sometimes conflict will arise. Therapeutically, people who are centered just in the present time perspective, such as those with schizophrenia, may be perceived as having lack of ambition or feel apathetic about the future. That's part of their condition. Sometimes people who have had a significant injury view the experience of the incident as something that's immortalized in time. For example, a person that's had a head injury and there was a fatality. It had to do with maybe they were driving too fast, or they were drinking, or now have this serious injury that they're having to live with. It's almost like time stopped. There's a suspension of time, and their body becomes a constant reminder of the incident. It may be they're constantly reminded of the fact that they were careless. And so that really is going to impact the potential success of intervention and that person's future identity. And it's only when the person can reconceptualize their condition in relation to the temporal implications that are associated with the meaning of the incident that they can move on. So they have to be able to rebuild their life identity. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the pace of time. And pace is a rate of movement. The individual differences explaining the passage of time appears to be based on age, personality, cultural experiences, and attitudes. Psychophysical and psychological factors such as temperature of the body, state of arousal, effects of drug can also impact the time perception. Biologically, for every individual, time felt, such as feeling rushed, is interpreted by the older regions of the brain. Time understood, or knowing the day or the hour, is interpreted by the newer regions of the brain. And slowness, or of how we perceive someone, has been associated with the speed or the pace at which people walk or move, has been associated with memory. So there is a secret bond between slowness and memory, and between speed and forgetting. So when you're trying to think about something, the next time you're really trying to concentrate and remember something, what does your body do? You usually slow down. You might look up in the sky, but you usually stop what you're doing to slow down, because you're trying to remember an event or something that happened. But when you're trying to forget something, especially if it's something that doesn't put you in a good light, we usually will speed up, maybe walk faster, because we're trying to avoid the confrontation or the memory of that particular activity. We're going to talk now about the biotemporality and occupational patterns. So when we're talking about synchrony, our occupational patterns are highly tied in with our biotemporal rhythms, if you will, and how each individual perceives the world has to do with the amount of attention, their problem-solving abilities, whether optimistic or pessimistic, whether they daydream, their physical response to medications, their activity levels, and many other variables. Some individuals are going to have a very healthy sleep-wake cycle. We categorize an individual's ability to have synchrony with whether or not they're larks or they're owls. If you're a lark, you're usually awake early and you go to sleep early. If you're an owl, you're going to go to wake later and go to bed later. Societal expectations have maybe force you into doing something you wouldn't typically do if you were left to your own device in terms of your sleep-wake cycle. So for example, if you are a owl and you have an 8 o'clock class in the morning and you don't want to go to bed till 2 o'clock at night, it makes it really tough for you to function. So how you view the world, how you problem solve, your activity level is probably going to be impacted by that. Infant will take about biotemporality, and in utero, the infant becomes very much in tune with the mother's circadian rhythm. But sometimes the mother's circadian rhythm may be off, or just because they're uncomfortable and they can't sleep, or they've got some medical issues associated with the pregnancy. And so when the infant is born, they might not have a very synchronous biorhythm. But with social cues and the light considerations and regular scheduling of the infant, it usually takes them about 5 months before they can have a good synchrony and good sleep-wake cycle, so that they're sleeping all night long, they're taking regular nap times at the same time, internal clock for eating, their temperature regulation, and if it's a healthy baby, that's about the average for infants to get in line with the family. For the elderly, changes that occur as a result of illness or just aging kinds of things. In the well elderly, we've found that circadian rhythms that are healthy, they still have same synchrony of pattern, but they tend to get earlier and earlier. That's why we talk about the early bird specials. You know, you go to a cafeteria and at 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, elderly people frequently are wanting to go out to eat, and as younger people may have a tendency to want to go out to dinner at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. Individuals who are elderly, who are ill or institutionalized, there is a occupational pattern that occurs, sometimes a phenomenon right at dusk that's called sundowning, sundowning, sundowning. And this is good to recognize in individuals, because frequently what happens is they get very confused and restless during this time period. And I think that's very important for you to recognize if your client is experiencing this, so that you can help and that people around them understand what's going on, and maybe even make some environmental changes that would impact the individual. All right, we've kind of hinted at this a little bit, but sociotemporality is when we look at the calendars and the socials that occur in one's life that helps us adhere to rituals and patterns of activities. So I always laugh with the making out the calendar for each semester. In academia, it's we have to plan what we're going to do when we give you your syllabus for the next 3 months, kind of thing. So when I'll call people up and ask them to be a speaker in November, when it's August or July, they're like, well, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in November. And that's just part of our academic ritual and pattern of activities, whereas it may be totally foreign to somebody else. Clocks, calendars, the weekday end, work days, rhythm gives us a sense of when it's time to work, it's time to do school and academic things, and then when it's time for leisure. There's certainly going to be cultural differences in time, when holidays are celebrated, when even within the family structure, how they do things might be different than another family. The book talked about M time and P time. The monochronic, or M time, emphasizes efficiency of time use, doing one thing at a time and being strictly observant to time commitments. This is very effective if you have buy-in to this concept for work or business, because you have a lot of deadlines that need to be met. I would think it would help you with your school in keeping up with all of the tasks and activities that are associated with your education. Polychronic time, or P time encourages us to do multiple things at once. So this is going to be our stay-at-home moms, or maybe a farmer or someone who works in agriculture. They can be much more fluid and adjustable. Stay-at-home mom making lunch, and oh, Johnny spilled his milk, and so we're going to stop and clean that up. Billy had a meltdown, and we're going to have to address that because he wasn't getting the attention because you took the time to take care of the milk, and the dryer went off, and so you're going to fold the clothes, and now we're now back to getting our lunch. So you get the idea. It's very fluid, and the mom just kind of goes with the flow in terms of everything might get done or might not get done, where there aren't explicit deadlines that have to be met during the individual's day. Another part of social temporality is the economy and time. We, especially in the United States, we value time as money. How many times have you heard that before? That is a value that we have. I think you'll experience this when you start working. They call it productivity. They expect therapists to see so many clients and write so many notes in a work day. So if the productivity is very high, for example, if you go to interview for a job and they say, well, we're very proud of the fact that our productivity is 90%. Yeah, you might want to question that, because that means you're going to be doing probably a lot of things on your own time to be effective, to be able to 90% of your time that you're seeing someone that's going to be paying for their services, writing your notes, taking a break, having discussions with people, collaborating with other professionals is going to be at a minimum, because you're going to be hopping to get things done. We also have to be considerate if, we do live in the United States, and that's our kind of flow. But culturally, there are some differences between the South and the North. There are also differences, there's certainly differences between the United States and in other parts of the world in terms of how they view economy and time. I traveled one time over in Europe. I was amazed during the midday. They didn't really call it a siesta, but all the stores, everything closed during the midday. So from noon to 2 o'clock, there was nothing open except for restaurants. So it really encouraged you to slow down, take a break during midday. Just different values in different parts of the country to pay attention to. Some behaviors are repeated so often that they become habitual. They are performed on an automatic, pre-conscious level. Habits reflect actions related to values and interests cemented over time within daily patterns. Habits provide a crucial service to adaptation by organizing temporal behavior to meet societal requirements for competence. Habits are more likely to occur in familiar environments and conserve energy needed for attention and decision making, while enabling us to do things when we must do regularly without requiring high levels of motivation. Routines are occupations with established sequences, such as a morning ritual. They provide an orderly structure for daily living, and studies have supported the idea that certain activities naturally take place at certain times of the day. For example, work and self-maintenance activities tend to occur in the morning, or at least going to work, and for example, work and self-maintenance activities tend to be in the morning and early afternoon, whereas leisure, restful activities are associated more with late afternoon and evening kinds of things. You need to pay attention to a client's regular routine in what they do and try to design the occupations that meet those routines, establish effective intervention strategies. Many people with disabilities need more time than those without disabilities to meet their health needs and conduct routine activities. A gentleman by the name of Walter Oy, known economist who also happened to be blind, he suggested that disability steals time, leaving people with disabilities less time for vital activities such as work and social engagement. In general, there have been time use studies. There's a whole field that looks at occupations and how people use their time, and they have studied individuals with disabilities. And these studies suggest that disability has a negative impact on time use in terms of the frequency of activities participated in, there's higher unemployment, and there's altered time allocation compared with the general population. This is important because people with disabilities also have been shown to experience less satisfaction with their performance of activities, so that they do less and they enjoy less. Some studies have compared the time use of clinical and non-clinical populations. Time use is a constant that we can measure, so therefore it provides a basis for comparison between those who are able to engage in a healthy range of occupation of their own choosing versus those who don't have those choices. For example, a therapist may find that a person wants to rest in bed all day, every day. They just don't have the energy to get up and going. We talk about client-centered and giving clients choice to be able to do that. So that's one aspect, or one way that you can look at it. However, we also, through the time use data based on healthy individuals as a reference, we also know that the data suggests that a loss of skill through lack of use may lead to a therapist to challenge the students, because if we know that we just allow them to give them enough time to get their energy or to get their strength back, that's not going to occur. You can use that to challenge the client and in order to get them healthy again and trying to get them more engaged. In the American Time Use Survey that occurred, this was from a report that I read in 2014, it examined the use of adults with disabilities to those without disabilities. And this study found that individuals with disabilities spend more time on health-related activities and less time on other activities than those without disabilities. And that makes sense. Because they have disabilities, they probably have a lot more health issues, so they spend a lot more time going to the doctor and getting treatment. The report also found that most working-age men and women who had a disability worked fewer hours per day than men and women without disabilities. And on the average, most of the decrease in paid work time is offset by more time spent in leisure activities and sleeping. Okay, so we talked about time use with people with disabilities, and now we're going to talk about problems that occur when individuals have circadian rhythm disorders. Circadian rhythm disorders are caused by the body's internal clock not resetting and adapting to change in sleep patterns, or doing so very slowly. If you've ever flown somewhere for a long distance and experienced jet lag, you can have a little bit of understanding or appreciation of what people might experience as a result of having a asynchronous rhythm. I think a little bit we indicated that when, like, through the changes with daylight savings time, not so extreme, but sometimes with an older person that may be a significant impact. I looked at the Center for Disease Control, and they had a report that said shift workers and night workers often are tired and sleepy because of their work schedule. Being overly tired makes it difficult to concentrate, which increases the possibility of errors or accidents, and they can be at risk for both to the worker and to the general public, depending on what they're doing. The stress of shift work can also aggravate health conditions such as heart disease and digestive disorders. We do know that individuals who work shifts, so nursing is a profession, that there are some other of the medical health related, but probably nursing is probably the most well-known in the health fields. But even shift works at factories or police, firemen, any job that requires 24/7. It's easier if you only work one shift and you can get your days and nights, changed around. You can still establish a rhythm, but when you have shift work, you're constantly changing it up. There are also some specific mental illness disorders, or disorders that are physical impairment, that such as blindness, being isolated from like prisoners of war, where they're kept isolated. Even some children who were in orphanages that stayed in the same environment cause period disorders that impact an individual's circadian rhythm, and can certainly add to the health issues that these individuals have is the seasonal affect disorder, and it's characterized by fall and winter major depression, with summer, then usually in the spring and summer there's a remission. I think it's probably or occurs in more people that live up north, I mean really north, like Maine and Alaska, because of the cycles of the seasons there and the daylight. Seasonal affective disorder etiology is something to do with the neurotransmitters and hormones and circadian rhythm dysregulation and psychological factors. And one way to treat it is through light therapy, and that seems to be the probably the best approach. But there also have been some other alternative and supplementary approaches that have, like cognitive behavioral therapy might be something that OT would do, or exercise, and there may be some medications that can be used if the light therapy is not enough. What happens as a result of temporal disorders? It has been identified that the increased pace of life in industrialized nations may not only produce stress and consequent ill health, but also robs people of a satisfying and meaningful life. It is not sufficient to simply participate in occupations, but the occupational being must also be able to remember and understand them within the framework of an unfolding story. The tempo is internal and integral experience to healthy individuals and communities. We need to make sure that we pay attention to the temporal aspect of an occupational experience, because it can be extremely detrimental to the health. And you can see some of the outcomes: decreased life satisfaction. There's an emphasis on materialism with reduction to meaning. So it's more about how much I can get and not spending quality time. I think we've all seen the results of that. Immediate gratification and the fast pace. I think technology adds to that. Also, the fast pace provides limited opportunities. If the families are constantly, we've got soccer practice now, and then we're going to take this child to baseball, and then we're going to take this one over here to dance, and we don't have time to spend to have a meal together. We're just going to catch something to eat on the road, and then we get home, we've got to do homework and get baths, and it's time for bed, and then we got to get up earlier in the morning because we didn't quite get the homework done. So when is the child going to be a child and have an opportunity to play? And play is very vital to the importance. So you can see how what doesn't necessarily seem to be a time factor really is, if you break down the task and look at it. What are we going to do in therapy in terms of looking at how can we infuse time management, if you will, into the occupational experience? So one way we can do it is that if you think about an occupation when you look at the sequence of doing something, that when you're developing or constructing, if you will, the occupational experience, it's set in chunks of time. So if an individual has never done a particular activity before, or they've had a disruption in a familiar activity, they will chunk the experience in shorter segments, so you can break down the task and do shorter periods of times. There's usually several phases that we want to look at. We will want to look at, and this is why you might have thought it was odd that the framework emphasized initiating, sustaining, terminating, but that's part of looking at the time aspects of an occupational experience. We're going to look at the beginning, we're going to look at the middle, the end, how they initiate movement or cognition or communication, how an individual makes decisions, whether they can follow the sequence step by step. Do they perform it with very brief, minimal actions, or is the task very complex and multitask? Does it last? How long does it last? The duration of it, is it going to be an ongoing activity that they need to learn, or this is a one-time experience? Is it there kind of any kind of closure when you discontinue the action? And does it require any kind of reflection about the outcome? So we want to look at pace, duration, speed, and rhythm. Our brain only has a certain amount of attentional capacity, so sequences need to be familiar, and you can eliminate things like making choices, problem solving, when they're first learning a task. So you tell them what the answer, you help them with what they need to do until they can establish a habit and routine, and then you can then start challenging them with higher level skills. So these are some different ways that you can impact time use. You can look at attention span, helping them focus. You can eliminate distractions in the environment, so they only have to focus on whatever it is that we talk about figure ground. Having just the items you need to get, and then gradually add more items until they can increase their attention span. You can have more people in the room that distracts them. That's a way that you might upgrade an activity. Activity choice. Initially, if they can't make a selection just by spontaneous, think about yourself in terms of when you're taking a test. What's easier? Is it easier to do multiple choice when you have the options there, or to fill in the blank when you have to come up with it? Well, it's the same thing with a client. You can say, well, what do you want to do today? And that may be very challenging for the individual, as opposed to, would you like to do this, or would you like to do this? Or even allowing them some choice in terms of the length of time that they perform. Maybe you're not going to complete an activity. So that's going to be influenced by the individual's or the client's values, their interests, and goals. And I think we've talked about that enough in the past that you can see how that might impact time. You also want, sometimes people are very impulsive and they just will jump right in there. When they initiate and they get right to the finished product, so they don't slow themselves down. So you might have to slow the activity down. So maybe you're going to be working on shaving, and they lather up, the man puts the shaving cream all over his face, and then they're moving really fast. It's a safety concern if they have a regular razor. So you may have to slow them down a little bit. Okay, even things like, let's count, or we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there's a lot of things that we provide pacing. Even I've used pacing with infants in feeding. There's actually a technique that's called pacing, where you work on the suck, swallow, breathe synchrony, and you allow the child so many times to take because they can't coordinate that themselves, so that you would pull the nipple out slightly to allow the child to catch their breath and put it back in. So I think that's a good way to slow people down if they're too impulsive, or they're not able to perform the activity with the quality that they need. Planning is another way, helping the individual break down the task, and they come up with, what are the steps that we need to do? What's first? What's next? That, especially if you've got an individual with cognition. And also, though, I think even individuals who are have just a motor deficit, if you will, they're now performing a task that's different. Maybe it's in a different way. Someone who's had a total knee replacement or a total hip replacement, and they have to adhere to certain precautions during the healing process in terms of the position that they can be in, so that the way that they have to learn to adapt the way that they dress themselves or the way that they walk, and but if you plan it out, they're much more likely to be successful if they know exactly what the expectation is they do. The other thing you can do in therapy, I think this is something we are constantly asking you to do as a clinician. What worked, what didn't work? What's the reflection? I think having your clients do that, how successful you are. I used to do that with the kids I worked with on handwriting. Look at, the words you just wrote. Are all the letters, what do you think about all the letters? Are they all the same size? Are they on the line the way they need to be? What's the quality? Can you read it? Are they too close together? Which one, you wrote in this sentence, you wrote 3 E's. Which one do you like the best and why? So that they begin to get a sense of errors and successes. And I think probably the biggest thing we can do is create for the individuals. If you're going to have it performed again in with quality and success, you're going to have to help the individual establish healthy habits and routines that will improve their quality of life and their overall health. And that's it. All right, thank you for your attention.